Vito Bassiani,
Present.
Steve Jules Guard,
Present.
Loma Melmed, Joe Panetta, Michael Summers.
Present. I'm just in transit, but I'll be on the video in a couple of minutes.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, we've got a quorum and we can
Is-
proceed.
Isn't Al Roulette a committee member? I thought he was chairman.
Yes. Thanks, Steve. Al Roulette is not going to be at this meeting today. And his service on the CERM Board of Directors terminated yesterday.
Oh,
Yes.
that's all right. I just, because I've always dealt with Al in the past, and I was chairman for a while, and then he succeeded me, and I just assumed he was still involved. So anyway, no further explanation.
Yesterday was a very busy day. He sent me a letter of resignation. I guess it falls under the category of personal reasons. And
Sure.
It was a little abrupt, especially coming on the eve of this meeting today. I certainly thanked him for his service to the board, which has been exemplary. And note to Maria and myself, we probably should figure out some way to acknowledge his service to the board. But we're going to proceed without him today.
Sure. All right. Thank you for that.
No, well, thanks. It was an oversight on my part. Please don't read anything into that. It's just because today's been a little bit hectic, and I didn't mean by the oversight to slight his service to the committee or to the board. Yes, so can we proceed to the first serious order of business, which is the consideration of our administrative budget for the fiscal year that starts in July. And I think we'll start with a formal presentation.
Yes.
Pune Simpson.
Good afternoon. I'm Pune Simpson, Senior Director of Finance, and I thank you for the opportunity to be able to present the 23-24 fiscal year administration budget. We want to start all of our presentations with our mission statement, which is accelerating world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. Before I begin, I just wanted to review our agenda. First, we will review the results of the current year, fiscal year 22-23 budget, and the ICOC approved and major drivers that impacted. Then we will dive into the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget, and again, the major drivers that are leading to the results of that proposed budget. So first, let's start with the 22-23 budget. And before I go into the financial results, I wanted to remind everyone in the subcommittee of the context in which the budget was created. With the board's approval, CERM has launched new initiatives and grant opportunities in the last several years. This results in continued ramp up of staffing, address the increased workload. The 22-23 budget included 60 authorized positions. Thus far, we have recruited 14 new positions, and 4 are in various stages of the hiring process. Of these 4, 1 is in the final stage, and the employee will be starting before the end of the fiscal year. But the other 3 are being zeroed out and added as part of the request for next year, which you will see in an upcoming slide. We also moved to the new headquarters in South San Francisco. And finally, we had a partial resumption of pre-pandemic activities, including travel and in-person meetings. This resulted in savings, which I will talk about in the next few slides. So let's look at the financial results from this period. In this chart, we show the total approved budget of $26,214,000 in the second column. The agency is estimating to finish the year with expenditures of $21,704,000 shown in the third column, with the fourth column showing the variance of $4,510,000. These savings resulted from the team's management of expenditures and keeping costs down while still growing. As a reminder, funds not spent in a fiscal year become available in future years for programmatic expenditure. The categories which resulted in the greatest savings were employee expense, reviews, meetings, and workshops, office expenses, and rent. Some of the expenditures that didn't materialize, I will be focusing on in the next few slides. With regards to employee expenses, we had an ambitious plan to fill positions. Through the hard work of HR and the leadership team, again, we filled 14 positions. 1 is in the final stages, and 3 are in recruitment, but will also be shown as an ask for 23-24. Reviews, meetings, and workshops that had been planned in person, some of them became virtual and some were postponed. And finally, with regards to move costs and office expenses, through the due diligence of staff in shopping around for best prices and contracting below what was anticipated, we're showing savings here that will be returned for future expenditure. In the next slide, we show the higher expenses for external services. The primary reason that we are showing this increase is because there was a realignment of some of the expenditures that were being shown in office expenses. To make that correction, there was an increase in external services. So you see a decrease in one and an increase in another. We also had some consulting services this year for some of our new initiatives that we have. So slide number 9, we'll transition to the 23-24 budget. CERM is requesting the approval of $28,938,000 in 23-24. We show this ask in comparison to the current budget and estimated to finish in this chart. So again, the second column is what the board approved, $26.2 million. The third column is our estimated to finish, which we were just looking at, $21.7 million. And the fourth column is the new ask, $20.9 million, which represents the resources needed to carry out the goals set out by the strategic plan in fiscal year 23-24. The last column is a variance of $7.2 million between what we're asking for next year and what our estimated to finish is this year. So I want to talk a little bit more about what's causing that variance. The 3 major categories contributing to it are employee expense, external services, and reviews, meetings, and workshops. In the next few slides, I will detail out the major drivers for these changes, both in terms of increases and decreases. In terms of employee expenses, the net increase is $4.5 million. And the reason I say net is because in some areas there were increases, but then in others there were decreases. So it's a net of $4.5 million. The primary reason for that is the 9 new positions. Again, 3 of them continuing from this year and 6 new ones. Because there are 3 already in recruitment, we asked for 2 others to start in July. And we're moving them out and scattering them throughout the fiscal year so that there isn't extra funds being asked for positions that won't be filled. So in October, we're asking for 2 additional positions, and finally in January, 2 more, for a total of 9 positions. This will take our total count to 66 positions. There was also some adjustments based on actuals for patient advocate board member per diem and a decrease in state mandated retirement adjustments that were added into our totals. With regards to the net increase in external services, there are some one-time consultant needs that have increased. For example, business development using consultants for co-funding and warrant-based options. The performance audit, which is an audit that takes place every 3 years, and next year will be one of those years where the audit will be performed. Some consulting for legal services, IT help desk and security consulting, and the consulting contract for alumni portal. We also had a reduction in the contingent move contracts as most of the move expenditures have already taken place. We also realigned, again, some of the expenditures from office expense up to contracts. For example, the ADA compliance of making our websites compliant. The net impact is $996,000. Finally, the increase in reviews, meetings, and workshops. We have a higher cost of reviews. We are increasing to 5 in-person board meetings. We're continuing our scientific workshops and advisory meetings. We're also continuing our clinical and translational advisory panels. The total financial impact of the category is $847,000. There are also some risk factors that I want to go over. So CERM continues to actively manage costs. However, there are factors that are out of our control. For example, recruitment and personnel growth, economic instability, and post-pandemic recovery of meetings, travel, and work activities. With that, we're requesting a recommendation of approval of the 23-24 budget for $28,938,000. I'm happy to take questions on the request. If there are any.
The floor is open to questions.
Steve Jules Guard.
Thank you.
Yes, Panay, if we can go back to slide 12, the one of net increase in employee expenses. So I want to dig into the last line, the financial impact compared to last year. So one of the financial impacts is the addition of potentially the addition of 9 headcount. Now, I'm assuming that that doesn't make up all of the 4.512 million. So my question is, what are the assumptions built into the existing staff and increases in compensation? What is being thought about for increased compensation for existing staff that's in that 4.512 million?
Okay, so to kind of step back to the overall $19.8 million for employee expenses, just to break that out into the 3 categories. Our existing staff that we are paying for, they're already on board with benefits and other personnel costs are $18.5 million. So if we didn't add any other positions, it would cost us $18.5 million to continue our operations, which includes a 3% merit increase. We also have a budget of $488,000 set aside for per diem for patient advocates, which also falls in the employee expense category. So the 6 new positions are accounting for $884,000 of our ask. And that's primarily because so many of them are starting later in the year. They're not the full year costs, they're partial costs. So if that answers your question in terms of what makes up the overall budget.
I'm sorry. So if you could really instead break down for me the 4.512 million into those categories. So what amount of that is going to existing staff, and how has that been calculated? So is it because some of the existing staff have been there less than a year, and so we're now counting full salaries instead of partial salaries? I just want a little more clarity on the composition of that number.
So it's a combination of all of those. There are some half-time positions that are now becoming permanent. There are some adjustments in benefits that are occurring. Actually, there's a reduction in retirement. There's an increase in merit salary increases. So let me try and break that out for you. So we had an increase of let me look at it real quick. $3,447,000, which has to do with our new adjustments made to the existing staff. I don't know a better way to say that. So there's some adjustments in transit. There is $1.6 million in terms of changes in our retirement and benefits. There is a budget adjustment of a delay of hiring those 3 positions, which we're adding next year that we're taking out this year. So we're showing the savings this year and adding that back in for those 3 positions for next year. So it's a combination of many variables that add up to that 4.5.
Okay, so I want to go back to something that you mentioned that I want to just focus on for a moment. You talked about merit increases for staff. Now, typically in organizations, there are 2 types of increases. One are cost of living adjustments, which the state makes, typically across its employee pool, if it makes them. And then the other are increases in addition to that, which are termed, at least in my parlance, merit increases. Can you break out for me a little bit on an average basis what we're talking about for cost of living versus merit?
Okay. So like you said, the state has a merit adjustment. If you don't want me taking a stab at answering this.
How can I try?
Okay, sure.
And then thanks, Mr. Julesgaard, for the question. In comments to people around the table, I yesterday may have made confusion, or sort of like a lapsus linguae. Here was my input to this process. Given the state of the budget for the state of California, which when we started this process was 26 or $22 billion in the hole, now up to 37 billion. I thought that we should take a look at, ask for guidance from the state on how they were going to factor in the state's economic situation statewide with the other 150,000 employees. And what this budget reflects is a 3% increase for merit across the board. And we're holding off on cost of living increase. And I had reversed this. I apologize for that yesterday, these 2 terms. Holding off on the cost of living increase to see what, if any, is given to the rest of the state's workforce. If the state comes through with 0, then I think we will stick to 0%. If it goes with 1 or some other percentage, we'll go along with that. Do you want to add anything to that, Pune?
That's exactly right. We built in 3%.
Does that help, Steve?
Yes, it does. So let me just ask then with a little more detail. So is the 3% an average number per employee, or is it 3% for each and every employee? And the reason I ask that is because in a different world, not this one, you would give merit increases to individuals based on performance, with some getting greater merit increases and some getting lesser merit increases. But I'm curious as to how merit increases are handled at CIRM with the notion that of the 3% number. Is that just 3% across the board, or is there variation amongst the employee population?
So it isn't across the board. Employees that joined our team within 6 months are not eligible for the merit increase. So we take that into consideration for this next budget, not to build in an increase for them, but we do estimate.
Right, but I if I understand your question, Steve, this is good. I'm new at this, so but I think we should take a look at it. It's a misnomer. Merit in this case is a misnomer. If everyone except for an excluded class is getting it, it should be called a raise.
No, I agree with that. I mean, that's what, merit is, as the term itself describes, you merit an increase, and merit is a differential notion. Not everybody has the same amount of merit, at least as I said, in a different world than one I'm more familiar with. So hence my question. So it sounds like everybody gets the same increase, irrespective of how well or not well they perform.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yes, thank you.
I do want to add one thing. Employees do undergo a performance evaluation every year. If a manager deems that their employee is not performing, they do not get a merit increase. But the variable of, is it 1% to 6%, depending on a gradation of, yes, you're at this end versus another end. No, it's just a 3%. If your manager determines that based on your performance evaluation, it's meritorious. So I don't want to say that absolutely everyone gets one without any sort of sense of how they're performing. There is an evaluation that is, that goes on. That helps.
But if I understand what you just said, Maria, 3% is a cap. In other words, if somebody is an extraordinary performer, it doesn't make any difference that they're extraordinary. It's just 3%. The merit
Correct.
increases. Okay.
Correct.
We can have
Steve, if I may, it's Maria Milan. We
Right.
can maybe, just to let you know, we are in the process and we have a new human resources director that just joined us, and Rafael Sicasa, who is our general counsel, is in charge of that department. And we actually are evaluating this. So for purposes of budgeting, the 3%, as Maria said, is in the past, we have used that for those who meet
Meet
expectations. So it's kind of like an off on, yes, no. And, but we are evaluating that further, and we'll get back to you if there's been a change in that.
All right. Well, that's all right. Just, this is an internal issue, a management issue of how you run an organization. But I was curious about it. If you don't mind, let me ask another question, which goes to the travel budget, which is increasing by 98% over the expected to finish current fiscal year. So roughly double in terms of as I'm looking at the proposed budget. Can someone explain a little bit what's anticipated in terms of such a large increase in travel?
So in comparison to prior years before pandemic, this budget is lower than what had been budgeted in the past for some. Because there was absolutely no travel for 2 years and very limited travel last year, this looks like a large increase, but we're really just resuming the participation in in-person conferences in various opportunities to meet with different stakeholders and training opportunities. So this isn't any more than what we had been spending prior to the pandemic.
Okay. The in-person board meetings. So we said there's 5 in-person per year. I take it those are board meetings. Is that right?
Correct.
And which part of I forget which part of the budget are they included in?
It would be under reviews, meetings, and workshops for a portion of the costs, and in employee expenses for per diem paid to board members.
And is that expense principally related to the venue in which the meetings are being held, the renting of whatever it's called, the lighthouse or something, or?
Right. Venue, travel costs for the members participating, are the primary drivers of them. And the audiovisual services we contract for.
Okay. So, one of the things that I requested in offline conversations was just a description of the various buckets of funding that we pull these funds from, because there's not just one bucket provided for by Proposition 14. There are actually at least 3 that these expenses come from. So that people understand that there are limitations on what you can expend based upon the buckets from which the amounts of money come from. And I don't know if you have that slide available or not.
Yeah. I do. It's the last slide.
It's more for information, but I think it's, important for people to understand. Yeah, that's it. So
thank you for asking this question. It's always good to review what is in the proposition and how we're allocating funds. So the bond The proposition starts with $5.5 billion. And in the proposition, there are different buckets of money identified and set aside. So right off the top, we have general administrations, which is not to exceed 3.5%. There's also 1% set aside for affordability and accessibility. Finally, the treasurer's office takes from the top any cost of issuance, which could include the capitalized interest, the interim debt, the interest, and their own costs for servicing our bonds. So we set aside $100 million for that. Those three categories equal 347, just upwards of $347 million that come off of the 5.5 billion. What's remaining is then calculated for grant administration. That's 3% or $165 million. And then that pays for our science program and education, our therapeutics program, and our portfolio development and review. And what's remaining out of that is technically research funds. And from research funds, the proposition is very clear that we are to pay for compliance, grant working groups, and the clinical and translational advisory panels. So that's a total of $80 million for that bucket. So how this works is the treasurer, in conjunction with the state controller, creates separate accounts for each of these categories that have these maxes that cannot be exceeded. And they are made available to us through the accounting system that we use in the state. So as we're transacting in that accounting system, we're seeing these caps in these different buckets, and we're attributing costs as appropriate for each of them. And the total of that being the $592 million that you had mentioned you had seen in the research budget. So hopefully that's a good overview.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. That certainly helped clarify things for me in terms of where the money is coming from and what the limitations are that are provided in that proposition for these different areas.
Thank you for asking the question.
So I see Dr. Melmet has his hand raised and Michael Stamos has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just want to extend from a different lens Steve's questions. Do we have benchmarks for like nonprofits, grant agencies for office overhead, like the Howard Hughes or American Heart Association? Because just showing us a budget like this without benchmarks really doesn't help us offer a judgmental fiduciary assessment.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the benchmarks that they have proposed. What are you looking for in those benchmarks?
I don't know. I mean, I'm asking you, what percent does Howard Hughes spend of their grant portfolio on administration? What percent does the American Heart Grant Agency, American Cancers? There are lots of granting agencies in the country. So there should be national benchmarking for the cost of administering those grants.
Right.
Are we above? Are we below? Are we midline?
So this is roughly 7.5% of the total 5.5 billion, if that helps. The majority of the funds that were given to us in Prop 14 are for research.
No, I know that, but I'm asking where does that 7.5% stand in relation to the rest of the country's organizations which give out grants?
Yeah, Shlomo, I hear your question. It's a comparative, and we with only one number, there's nothing to compare it to. So I think that would take some work on our part. I don't think it's been done before. It's not been asked. It certainly is accessible information. You're basically asking a similar question to charities like American Lung, American Diabetic Association. How many pennies of every donated dollar actually see science as opposed to overhead? I think we could get that information.
Yeah, it should be quite straightforward.
Yep. Thank you.
Dr. Melmet, this is Scott. Are you asking us in relation to, say, the research institutions negotiated rate with the NIH?
No. I'm saying the SERMs, the 7.5%, these dollars on this slide that we're spending on administration, where does that stand nationally as for example, compared to the Howard Hughes organization, which gives out medical research grants? Where do we stand compared to the American Heart Association? Similar organizations which give medical research grants also have the same needs for compliance and legal and back office. How much are they spending on administration? And just simply to understand, are we spending more or less, or are we on the same wavelength?
Get back to you on that. I think that. the
Because
team right now-
just asking us to approve a number because it happens to fall within the guidelines of the
Yes.
proposition really doesn't give us a chance to offer you a judgmental assessment that we would approve it. I mean, obviously we're going to approve it, or hopefully, obviously, but we'd just like to know that what we're doing is within the realms of what national norms are.
Michael Stamos has.
Michael,
Yeah, can you put that slide back up for a second, if you don't mind? So my question was a little bit different. If I understood correctly, this was part of the bond passage, these numbers, and these are the maximal amounts you can spend in each of these buckets, not the amount you're going to spend.
Correct.
And so the question is, if we don't spend $347.5 million in those three categories because we're lean and mean, can that money be then used for other purposes? Or how tied in are we at these numbers? What I'm getting at, because I don't think we can get the answer to Shlomo's question just by these numbers, because these are just a budget. These are not, I mean, not even a budget. These are just the max spend, correct?
Correct. So any funds not spent would be returned to the available funds that could go out as research grants. We wouldn't be
Okay.
able to attribute it to any other category that has a cap.
So that, I think it makes it even more important to look at that question, but thank you.
Thank you for the question.
No more hands,
are
right?
there any other hands?
No.
No,
Do
okay,
we need a
so,
motion?
well, yes, I thought we had, yes, we do.
I'll move to accept the proposed budget.
And recommend approval to the board.
I'm happy,
Recommend approval of the
I'm
board.
happy to second.
Okay, and yes, we have Board Member Juliash has seconded it. And now I'd like to open it up for any comments from the public.
There are none.
Let's give it 10 seconds in case anyone's having technical difficulties.
You know,
Steve?
if nobody does from the public, I just have one quick question going back to the cost of living increase issue.
Yes.
So let's assume that the state affords a cost of living increase, and I'll pick a number, whatever you wanted to pick 2%.
They
Let's
say
say.
2%, right.
Okay, is the money in the budget to account for that 2% for increased employee compensation, or are we going to have to come back and revisit that budget for that number?
Excellent question, Pune.
So there's $902,000 set aside, which equals 3%. And we will wait to see what that final percentage will be, but we have built in some of the money in this budget.
Okay, let me see if I can be clear. If you can clarify this for me. So how much money is set aside for the straight up 3% merit increase for those who get a merit increase?
$902,000.
And how much is set aside for any anticipated cost of living increase?
None.
Nothing. And so if there is a cost of living increase, then what do we do?
So first, we would look at other savings in the budget that might, for example, salary savings or other areas that we might be able to save money to pay for it before we come to the board. But in any situation, if the budget we're presenting is insufficient, we would come to the board and ask for an increase mid-year.
Got it. So the way you're presenting this budget is not as a line item notion. That is, we're approving each and every line item, employee expense, for example, of a budget of 2.183 million, but rather we're approving the entire number. Well, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page, but anyway, whatever it is, we're approving the entire number and giving you the flexibility to move money from one line item to another line item. Is
That's
that
exactly-
how we understand the budget, the
That's
approval?
exactly
Okay,
correct.
just
That is correct.
okay, got it.
Mary Ann, is there any member of the public asking to comment?
Nope.
No. In that case, the debate is over, discussion is over. We can proceed to a roll call vote.
Maria Bonneville,
Yes.
Linda Boxer,
Yes.
Anne Marie Dulage,
Yes.
Vito Bassiani,
Yes,
Steve Jules Guard,
Yes,
Shlomo Mehmed,
Yes.
Mike Stamos.
Yes.
The motion carries and passes.
motion carries, passes. Thank you very much. This committee will take responsibility for coming back with that homework on the comparisons with equal with other organizations that are engaged in our activity, possibly with the clarification that we are a state agency, and to some extent there might be, in ways I can't imagine, as I speak right now, differences, but we'll look into that too. Thank you for that, Shlomo. Any final comments? In that case, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.